Species.
Welcome to Origin of Species. This is Steve here with my good friend Scott. Today we're going to discuss the topic of self-help. But before we get going, if you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please go ahead and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review. And if you really, really like the show, support us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Species has supporter levels for every income imaginable. One of the benefits you get is to see full unedited interviews and also a bonus section we have with our interviewees called 3 Silly Questions. And this week we have Jesse Singal of the Blocked and Reported podcast, also the author of The Quick Fix, Why Fad Psychology Can't Cure Our Social Ills. And by the way, the Patreon wall, we've done this a few times with guests. Once you tell people they're behind the wall, they let loose. Right. Jesse, you're going to see, kind of a reserved guy when you see him talk. But once we, he knows it's only for Species Supporters on Patreon.com. You get to see another side of him. So tonight's topic is self-help. So for most of Western civilization's life, there's been books on how to live, whether it's religious texts like the Bible, whether it's etiquette or manners guides, or even things like, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, The Stoic Thought, and Art of War by Sun Tzu, which I've started using in Sunday school class this past year. Really kind of gave it an edge for the 2-year-olds. But in the last 100 years, started as a book genre, and I'd say it's almost like its own cottage industry. A genre called self-help has emerged. Massive industry, to put it mildly. Market data estimated that in 2019, the self-improvement market was worth $11.6 billion. And they saw nothing to make them think that would retract at any point. And I would have a feeling everyone staying at home the last couple of years, pondering their mortality, might be some good impetus for people to ponder self-improvement, self-help. And one of the things about self-help as a genre is very nebulous. It could be ways to improve your business. It can be ways to better address relationships or your diet. Self-help can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. And that leads a little bit to some of the criticism of the genre. It's something that seems to play on people's fears, I would say. No one has ever purchased Who Moved My Cheese or Rich Dad, Poor Dad because life was going really well. They weren't coming from a good place when they decided they needed that. And also, I think a criticism of self-help is, does any of this really work? You would think that if this was something that was so good that maybe it had been wrapped up about 100 years ago with the first book, but people always seem to be constantly improving.
One thought though, I bought Who Moved My Cheese because I thought it was like a revenge novel because I love cheese, and I thought there was going to be some sort of story about actual, how to get back at someone who took your cheese, which I would be very interested in. Yeah. Unfortunately, no.
Well, I think that's how it actually ends.
Good. Well, I didn't finish it. I saw it was a self-help book and put it away. So
the authors realize how to get new job skills and get new jobs, and then they kill somebody at the end.
Oh, really? Dang it! I should have finished it.
Sorry. Okay. Spoilers for Who Moved My Cheese.
It's been out for a while.
So tonight we're going to talk about the origin of the term self-help. We'll talk about the book from which it came from. We're going to discuss this book that started the self-help genre and discuss its author. Take on some criticism that self-help books and the industry has, and talk about the effects that are felt today. And in addition, we're going to speak to special guest Jesse Singal about his book entitled The Quick Fix, Why Fad Psychology Can't Cure Our Social Ills. That comes in a little bit of how the self-help books in the last few years have started getting a little bit more pseudoscientific and bringing in, some pop psychology that, as Jesse will discuss, doesn't necessarily stand up to the rigors of critical assessment. So to give the definition of self-help from Merriam-Webster, the action or process of bettering oneself or overcoming one's problems without the aid of others, especially the coping with one's personal or emotional problems without professional help. So no big surprises there.
Right.
One little bit of a surprise, the first use of this term comes in 1628. So courtesy of the OED, we see the first appearance of self-help in an English translation of the Roman poet Virgil's poem Eclogues. And the line is, all self-help and hope both failed. And in case anyone hasn't had a chance to read that, all those words are spelled in that crazy old English. There's just E's everywhere. Right. Lousy with E's.
Lousy with E's. I do also like that the first time it showed up, it was being basically shat upon. I don't know how else to put it, but it was like, we're going back to 1600. It didn't, I mean, he said all self-help and self-hope is...
Both failed.
Both failed. Okay. So we're still trying with this though.
Right. And if shat was spelled, there'd be an E at the end of it.
Right.
In the translation of this. So I was really hoping that the where this term came from in use as we do now, self-help as a genre of book and improvement would have something very clever and mysterious, but unfortunately it's not. The self-help actually comes from a book entitled Self-Help with Illustrations of Character and Conduct from 1859 by a Scotsman by the name of Samuel Smiles.
Couple thoughts. First, I'm Scotch-Irish, and I don't know. It's a little concerning that the first self-help book was written by a Scotsman for some reason. I don't know why. I'd love to actually read it, but that's not who I would think about. I mean, not that there aren't some decent Scottish, I guess, philosophers. But and the other, gosh, what was the other one? I had another thought and it escaped me. But anyway, Scotsman.
Well, I'll tell you what got me is that his name, and it actually is Samuel Smiles.
Right. That was the other one.
If in our modern day I read this, I would think that is not his real name. I wonder what alias he's, what has he done and that he can never go back to Florida? Yeah. That he's changed his name to Samuel Smiles.
If I saw it on Quora, I'd say this is a fake account. Samuel Smiles. I mean, give me a break. Is it spelled Smiles too?
Yes,
it is. Is there a Y in there? Okay.
No Y's. And you would think with it, it's not as old as, the 1600s, but the appropriate amount of E's in his name. So so you mentioned, if you ever did want to read this, it's widely available on the internet through Gutenberg.org, amongst other things. So if you ever want to read it, you can. I've read a little bit of it, but let me tell you a little bit first about who was Samuel Smiles. So per Wikipedia, which quotes heavily from historian Asa Briggs' writings on Smiles, Smiles was not very successful in his careers as a doctor and journalist. He joined several cooperative ventures, but they failed for lack of capital. Disillusioned, he turned away from middle-class utopianism. He finally found intellectual refuge and national fame in the isolation of self-help. In his books, he extolled the virtues of self-help, industry, and perseverance. So what I like about him, too, is this is also in my stereotype of a self-help person, is they failed in many other things.
Right.
And logically, the next step is to reach out to other people.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of, I mean, this is not quite self-help, but, those seminars that people do, come here and we'll tell you how to, make a lot of money on the stock market. And it sort of begs the question, like, why do you need my credit card number if you know how to work the stock market? Do that, but, good for him.
Yeah, good for him. So a little bit more on Smiles from Matt Raymond in an article entitled "The First Self-Help Author Would Hate What the Genre Has Become." Smiles was a political reformer and gave frequent lectures about his vision for improving civilization. Essential to his philosophy was the belief that to build a better society, focus should shift to the individual, not to laws or programs. The virtues and strength of the people were of chief importance.
That's pretty good. It's like very Jordan Peterson there.
It is. I would say that too. And I'd say you see a little bit of, in a good way, you see the influence of this book on Jordan Peterson. Some more blatant than others, as we'll see here in a minute. And I think something else important to add was this was very much of the Victorian era. In the time of this book is a book of its time, and there's still things that apply today in good and bad ways. But the idea of a mid-Victorian would think self-help was a good virtue. You're pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. You're taking care of yourself. You're doing things.
Right.
The irony, of course, of help being that you have to reach out to someone else in the first place that is a bit contradictory.
It almost feels more like alternative help.
Yeah.
Right? Like is it really self-help? I mean, I guess you're seeking out the book, but if you go to a doctor, I don't know, you're seeking out a doctor. So it's almost like you're seeking an alternative way to help yourself out, I guess, other than medicine.
It is a little bit of a contradiction, but it's also a contradiction that makes $11 billion a year. So I'm not going to throw too much shade on it with that. And I've also now just been recorded saying throwing shade.
I noticed that moment.
Slang. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's a big time thing. You just said throw shade.
Yeah.
Let's dwell on that for a while. Don't move on yet. No. Go ahead.
We'll use this to let everyone know that we will have a new slang segment coming up today, and that both of our research on new slang has warped my brain even more. So a little bit about the book itself. Each chapter would have a theme or a topic, I guess. So one chapter was application and perseverance. Another was leaders of industry, inventors and producers. And from there, you would have stories about people and their accomplishments. So here are some of the people discussed in the book. Bernard Palacy, who passed away in 1589. He was a poor potter who threw his own furniture and fence palings into a furnace in order to create his famous enamel ware. And with this tenacity, he eventually was rewarded as the official potter to the French throne.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and throne actually being the throne, not a euphemism for toilet. This was the Victorian era. People didn't go to the bathroom back then.
Right.
Another person singled out, Granville Sharp, who passed away in 1813. A clerk in his spare time began the anti-slavery movement in Britain, eventually getting the law changed to ensure any slave setting foot in Britain would be free.
Wow. Good job.
Pretty good. Can't really, even though he's got some tweets somewhere that would probably offset that. I could see if he lived in the modern days, he ended slavery, but he probably misgendered a penguin at some point and would have that used against him.
Right.
And finally, Sir William Herschel, who lived till 1822, who, while working as an oboist in a traveling orchestra, became curious about astronomy. He built his own reflecting telescope and discovered Uranus.
Oh, wow. Always funny.
Always funny. Good.
Yes.
And it's funny because it's true.
Yes.
And I would also like to call out longtime listeners, hopefully will appreciate this. The Smiles also discusses Sir Walter Scott, who, to be clear, is not Sir Walter Raleigh.
Not Sir Walter Raleigh. I was trying to think of his name earlier when I was thinking about Scotsman, who had shown up on our show before. Yeah. Also thinking about Uranus, which I often do. What I love about that word is that even if you try to change the pronunciation to Uranus, it's still funny. Like urine is in it. It's either anus or urine. So that's my sophomore sense of humor coming out. But I do like that.
And that's also something that I will know that one day, like when I don't find that funny anymore, my time is done. It's time to shut it down.
Yeah. Well, you and I have private conversations all the time where if something like that comes up, we just have to pause for a moment and acknowledge it and move on.
Yeah. But we must acknowledge it's part of man code. We must acknowledge that.
Yes. I hope I never get mature enough to where we don't at least have to just stop and have a moment.
Yeah.
All right. So, well, we've had a few moments on Uranus.
Yeah, so we've had some great moments.
Yeah.
So one of the things that's interested me about this book is the parallels to modern self-help. That this is still a little bit of a format that you see of, discussions of people who have been successful, sometimes real, sometimes anecdotal. Something that jumped out to me was Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers, which is I don't know if it's technically a self-help book, but I think it fits in that Venn diagram area of, improvement and self-help and business inspiration, and, discusses the lives and success that people have had, many famous people, and just talks about, pulls out certain elements of their life. And this is also Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers is a book that's responsible for really popularizing the idea of to be an expert in something, it takes 10,000 hours of work to do.
And not to harp on it too much, you've pointed out the fact that it's a little contradictory that self-help is reaching out to someone else, getting a book that someone else has written. But it's also interesting. I mean, that the first book, like you said, it now echoes in what we still think of as self-help books, but it's more inspirational, right? You're being inspired by other people's stories. It's like a way to get you to, I guess you're still reaching within to find something, right? But it's by looking at an inspiration of someone else.
Yeah. And I think that kind of gets a little bit to the idea of, what do these books really accomplish, if anything? You can be inspired, but how do you kind of, that's great that you're inspired, but does it give you any like steps to fix stuff? And if it does, how come that we haven't found that yet, found the final step to make things be as they should be.
Right.
So continuing on, as this was the origin of the self-help book and genre, this book obviously was a big success, sold 20,000 copies within the first year of its publication. By the time Smiles passed away in 1904, it sold over 250,000, was translated into languages all across the globe, and really kickstarted the genre. So as with all things, there's going to be some critics, myself included as a critic of self-help books. And I'm going to quote here from Jessica Lamb Shapiro, who sifted through hundreds of self-help books when she wrote her memoir, Promised Land, My Journey Through America's Self-Help Culture. This is quoted from Time magazine. Self-help books completely respond to the time that they were written, and they tend to prey on people's fears and anxieties about that time. And as we were discussing Who Moved My Cheese, I believe that book came out in the 90s during a recession, at a time when jobs were transitioning overseas. It just, it wasn't necessarily a positive place that came from. Not that it's necessarily a bad thing. So continuing on, and it wasn't just modern day people that felt this way. In 1913, G.K. Chesterton wrote about this, and this is also from Time magazine, discussing the popularity of books telling people how to succeed. They are books showing men how to succeed in everything, he wrote. They are written by men who cannot even succeed in writing books. At least let us hope that we live to see these absurd books about success covered with a proper derision and neglect. So not a fan of them.
Right.
So before I give my thoughts on positive and negative on self-help books, are there any self-help books that you like or that you've read?
No. So I have a lot of thoughts about this whole thing. So first of all, self-help books, I've never gone out and looked for a self-help book, sort of in the same way that I've never bought a diet book, which I mean, it's like, not to say people can't use a self-help book to better themselves or a diet book to lose weight, but and this is probably maybe my arrogance or whatever, but I just feel like, look, I just need to eat less and exercise. When I do that, I lose weight.
Right.
Now, reading inspirational stories, sure. And then it's also what gets categorized as self-help. So I've certainly read books. Well, a matter of fact, I have read 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. So I guess, is that a self-help book? I guess it is, right?
I think I put it in the classy end of the genre, and maybe, but I think it is also a self-help book. It's probably advertised more as a philosophy book. And I'd say it's pretty deep. I've read that book too. But when you come down to it, if it's 12 Rules for Life, I think you could very well say that that's a self-help book.
But I think it gets into the whole thing of playing on people's fears, not saying 12 Rules for Life. I don't think that. I mean, if there is a person who will go out, and God bless this person, and I should be more like this person, right? Who will go out and look in the self-help section because they're going, I'm looking for another resource or way to make myself better. And this person, so it almost reminds me of, like, I don't know if there's such a thing, I'm going to make this term up or not, but guru culture, right? There's the thing of, you want a guru, Tony Robbins or one of those guys to tell you what to do to get what you want in life. And it's the same thing with the self-help genre. So have I read books? I've read fictional novels that have made me feel like I've learned truths about life and made me a better person or made me aspire to be something better. But what I do want to say is I don't think that you should give someone a self-help book. I think that you should buy it for yourself. So I have had many times, whether it's an employer, but more specifically, my father buy me self-help books. And I got to say, Dad, I love you. It's a little insulting when you buy someone. So I'll give you one example of that. So I would say I was probably 25 or 26 and just had gotten out, I went to college, was an English major. So I had no skills and I'd gotten a job in mortgage. I was feeling really good about my career. I'm moving up. And for my birthday, my dad gave me a book that was How to Make Money in Technical Writing, which I'm like, Dad, like I've got a career. What are you doing? But it wasn't received well by me. And I said, well, thanks, but I don't want to be a technical writer, which is what he does, by the way. And by the way, I love my dad. We have no problems, but he's also signed me up for like healthy, magazine or whatever. So it's like, and then employers that say, you need to read this book. Well, look, I've read books before from employers that are, I guess, technically self-help books and gotten a lesson or two out of them for sure. I mean, especially when it comes to something like, how to manage people. There are those old classic books like, the 1 Minute Manager or, and I've certainly learned things through that, I would say, but it's not something that I find myself going out and looking for and then spending time reading. And again, I think that you should probably think twice before getting someone else a self-help book. I don't think that's really in the spirit of what they're there for, but I could be wrong.
Right. And I think this is also a good time for us to announce our book that will be coming out, How to Make Money in Podcasting and OnlyFans. That will be released in the spring. Hopefully, we haven't locked up a publishing deal yet, but fingers crossed that we're gonna be able to lock that in pretty soon.
Absolutely.
So I've had similar experience in the business part, not yet of people giving me self-help books, but in different business roles I've had and sales roles that ironically I liked the books. I felt they were good. They kind of provoke you to think. I didn't feel like I learned, this is the way to do life, but they were encouraging. And spoiler alert, they didn't really work for me in terms of increasing my sales. But I found them to be helpful. But I think one of the things, two things I really don't like about them. One, the fear thing that we discussed before. A lot of these are kind of inspired, I feel like, out of a fear-based place. And also they're just very generic. It's something that should be an article that's spread over 200 pages. They're very formulaic. There's a story. I mean, you could insert anything. I'm Steve Glissman. I'm an expert on X technique. I was on an airplane and Bob sat next to me and he explained that he was having a problem with this. I told him about X, yada, yada. Bob now has tripled his income and, he doesn't need boner pills anymore. His back hair stopped growing. It's just something, whatever it is, seems to fix it. And I guess maybe a third thing, this is part of what I discussed with Jesse Singal in our interview later, is there's this very faddish / pseudoscientific thing that comes into it. And, I've often wondered why I still have such a hatred of kale. Now, obviously, step one, it's from the devil. But two, it's one of those kind of fad things that just emerged out of nowhere and was suddenly the greatest thing that's ever happened. And you see that a lot in self-help books too. Jesse Singal uses the term Tedification, that, inspired by TED Talks. Ideas, instead of just being a self-help book, here's some studies that really don't, once you dig in the numbers, prove anything that, says that technique X works.
Yeah, it's like the whole package. It's almost like, you buy a Coca-Cola, not so much even because of how it tastes or anything like that, or like that you get some great benefit from it. It's the whole package. It's the color, it's the cold can, and then they release a new logo and you get excited. It's the same thing. It's the repackaging of stuff that we kind of should already know. So you see that person on the TED Talk giving this really inspiring speech, and then you go to the takeaways of it and you're kind of like, well, I mean, I guess I kind of knew this stuff, you're inherently like, if you follow the 10 commandments and the golden rule, you're probably going to be okay in life. Yeah. But let's, not again. And I found TED Talks very helpful. So not helpful is not the right word. Fascinating or interesting. But
interesting. They're at their best, they're provocative and make you think.
Yeah.
Which is always good.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
So before I conclude with the history of self-help, Scott,
yes,
want to pass it to you to discuss some new slang with us.
Yeah, pass the mic. So yes, we're going to get to new slang in a second. I was thinking though about this whole self-help thing and ways I'm trying to, get better in life. And one of those things is I'm trying to become a better cook. Or, I have 2 kids. I take pride in the fact that I don't go out to eat a lot with the kids. Like I go grocery shopping and I cook for them, but I am not that great of a cook.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to share this with you because I haven't told you this because I want to get the reaction on the show, and maybe you'll make me feel better about this, but I don't know. We'll see. You're also the person that shamed me years ago for getting a big bite at 7-Eleven, and that's become that has been a recurring thing for at least 17 years now.
Mm-hmm. And you're welcome, by the way, for shaming you on that big bite.
Yeah, it's turned my life around, as you can see. But I went into I started to go in a little bit of a shame spiral with this one. So let me share this. So I'm trying to think of new things to feed the kids because I'm feeding them. It feels like, you come to Dad's house, you're getting stuff on the grill. It's like grilled chicken, grilled burgers, hot dog. I mean, whatever. That's meat, sausage.
Meat. Yeah.
All meat and vegetables, which is good, but it's also, I feel like you get to a certain point, my kids are 14 and almost 11, where you feel somewhat responsible for their palate or lack thereof, where you go, oh, my kid's going to be the kid that it doesn't like condiments or doesn't like, anything outside of these specific things. And so, and
basically somebody just like me is what I'm hearing, but please continue.
Yeah. Well, so I'm thinking of trying new things, and then they're telling me, hey, Mom made this thing at her house, and then I start going, oh no, I can't get one up, that much.
Oh yeah.
But when you hear what I went to, you're gonna have a problem with this. I haven't had Hamburger Helper in 30 years, something like that.
Yes.
And but my streak is broken. I bought Hamburger Helper, and I should have. So, Steve, I know the tuna helper was around in your day. I don't know if you ever did the hamburger. Did you ever do the Hamburger Helper before I tell you this?
Let me tell you something. The 4-fingered man was that logo was a major presence in my house. If it could be helped, which definitely tuna was included. We had that. That was probably a very high percentage of meals that I had came from had the 4.
But and I don't know about you, but I didn't have I've already insulted my dad, so let's go ahead and talk about my mom.
Yeah, balance.
My mom wasn't a great cook. I don't think she would claim to be, but she did put food on the table, and Dad did too sometimes. But there was a lot of Hamburger Helper. Right. There were 2. It was at least a couple nights a week.
Yeah.
And I loved it. I didn't have any discerning taste. I ate anything. My kids have much, they're more, I would eat anything that was put on my plate. So anyway, cutting to the chase, I'm out grocery shopping at my favorite place to shop, Lidl, and they have whatever the basic one is, cheeseburger macaroni. See, I can't even say it without feeling
No, I was gonna, if it makes you feel better, I was hoping you were gonna say that because I actually thought of that, and I have fond memories. But please,
that was good. I mean, I would pound some cheeseburger macaroni Hamburger Helper. So I'm thinking, you know what? When years ago, when I was laughed at mercilessly by other people that how you go to college and you're like, gosh, I sure do miss my mom's blueberry muffins. And I'm like, this is the best food I've ever had eating here at school, and other people are coming. Then you start realizing like, oh, okay. Mom wasn't Julia Child, right. But God bless her. I never went hungry. Okay. But anyway, so I'm going, you know what? I've been too hard on Hamburger Helper. I'm going to get this thing. It's on sale. It's like a $1.50. I'll get some decent, good hamburger and we'll make it. But to my credit, I did not make it for my kids. I wanted to try it myself first. So they went to their mom's house. Like the first night I made it and I had 2 or 3 bites of it and I threw it away. It was so bad. Oh, it was like high sodium, like mushy, and maybe it was me not making it right, but it was like, and now unfortunately we're not going to get the Hamburger Helper hand guy.
There we go.
What do you call it? I don't even know what it's called because we don't have
4-fingered guy. Hey, we still have our book coming out, so don't.
Yeah,
worry.
We still have our book. So, but anyway, and I had this moment where I was like, I can't believe I almost fed my kids Hamburger Helper. Now, if you're a parent and you feed your kids Hamburger Helper, I'm sorry, this is my issue. But all of a sudden, I said, no, I can do better than this. So, but the thing that cracked me up was looking at the package. On the front, it says mix it up, and it's like replace the hamburger with cut up hot dogs and put in there. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm not classy guy, but it's a line that I almost crossed. I kind of crossed it for myself, but at least I didn't expose my kids to it. So maybe that's the bright side.
I think that's a bright side. And to be honest, 97% of things you would have told me, I would have judged you hardcore on. You somehow found a narrow sliver.
What?
That my indignancy and judgment when it come out. I actually have fond memories of it. I'm sure that it's not the greatest food ever, and I think you've confirmed that for me. But I've been interested in trying it again, just to find it, just to see, to maybe relive that just as a nostalgia. So kudos to you for I actually think it was good that you tried that, and I think it's even better that you did not shame your children into having after you knew it was bad. And hopefully what you did afterwards was like, this didn't work. So you went and got Tuna Helper to help them for their next meal.
Yeah, we'll try that. All right, let's get into some new slang.
New slang when you notice the stripe.
So normally we pick our own new slang. This time you sort of assigned me this one, and it makes sense. Self-care. So it goes right along with self-help. I will say that when I started looking into this one, I thought to myself, well, what really can there be as a background to self-care? Right. Boy, was I wrong. This was one that could be a full topic that we do on a show. I'm not going to go into a very long normal segment with this, but we'll do a new slang on it. But I think you'll be surprised because you don't even, I thought maybe you gave this to me because you knew it had a really interesting origin.
No, I thought it would pair well with this. And it's also one, we pretend to be objective about terms sometimes. It's a term that I absolutely despise.
Yeah. I don't think this is going to, you might want to brace yourself on this one, to be honest with you, because you haven't Googled this, right?
No, I have not.
Okay. Let's start here. Wikipedia. The basic definition of self-care is, it says self-care is a process of taking care of oneself with behaviors that promote health and active management of illness when it occurs. Simple as that. It just means taking care of yourself.
Right.
There's a little twist here. Well, it says also, it goes on to say, everyone engages in some form of self-care daily with food choices, exercise, sleep, and dental care. Self-care is not new, although it has received increasing attention in recent years.
Right.
You know what? I'm not even going to read it. Examples of self-care. It's obvious. Go for a walk, drink water, practice good sleep hygiene. All these things would be considered the actual definition of self-help. Self-help actually, and Giannis Pappas would like this. Socrates has been credited with the founding of the self-care movement. So just like self-help, this goes back a while.
Wow.
So in ancient Greece, the idea of taking care of yourself and your loved ones, though, has been around really forever. The label, though, really started with Socrates. But let's jump way forward to the current way that we think about self-care. I'll kick it to you because I think you're going to probably answer the same way I would. You said you don't love the term. When you think about self-care, what do you think about?
I think about seeing something vapid on social media. And speaking of social media, please follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Speaksies. It's our handle on both of those things. Some sort of vapid post declaring that someone needs to go have some self-care, and it's not basic needs of exercising and drinking water. It's indulging yourself. And it's also framed in the context of you haven't been taking care of yourself. You need to do this for yourself, which to me is ironic, as we are probably the most spoiled group of people in America right now that have ever existed on the face of the earth. The idea that we really need to focus some more on ourselves.
Yeah.
We haven't been giving ourselves and our needs and wants and desires enough attention is a little bit silly to me.
Yeah. And it's really totally antithetical to where it started. I mean, or what the actual definition did. I mean, so we're talking about, this is the new slang segment. So we're talking about what is it currently, how is it currently used? And certainly what you just said is more how it's currently used. I don't think even heard the term until recently. And then when I've heard it, I've thought of, I mean, really everything you just said. I think of self-indulgence. I think of a me day, a mental health day. Again, you should take care of your mental health. You should, you know, don't work yourself to death. That all is sort of implicit and obvious, but we now, it gives us an excuse to go get a $7 venti pumpkin latte because this is my self-care, when actually that's probably the opposite of self-care. So there's an article in Everyday Health by Moira Lawler from May of this year, where she notes that according to Google Trends, searches of the term self-care has more than doubled since 2015. So she wrote that May of this year. So the last 6 years or so, the term has just exploded. Okay, so I tell you what, let's do this. Let's go ahead and look at Urban Dictionary. Let's just get it out of the way.
Yeah.
And then we'll get to why I found this self-care thing fascinating. I was gonna skip Urban Dictionary, and last second I looked it up just to see what it would have, because this is new slang.
Yeah, you can't leave Urban Dictionary out of new slang. It would just be wrong. Like serving that hamburger helper to your kids. It would be a bad thing to skip Urban Dictionary.
Right. So that's twice now I've avoided a really huge mistake, and it kind of pays off. So first entry, I'm gonna, I think, read 3 entries here. The first entry: self-care, masturbate. I'd go home for some self-care, but my younger cousin is here to visit, so I'll have to wait. So that gets right to the point. Self-care, doing acid and yelling at the moon naked. Self-care, there's a point to me reading these. Self-care is an umbrella term that Twitter/Tumblr/SJWs use to excuse their poor financial decisions. Why spend money on things like rent and bills when you can buy coloring?
So that's pretty good.
When you can buy coloring books from Whole Foods. I couldn't even get it out. And I got to read the explanation, or the example. I'm 6 months behind on rent. My phone got shut off and my car is getting repoed. I'm going to a $400 spa because self-care. I think that gets to the heart. That's why Urban Dictionary just comes through. Okay, one more. You twisted my arm. Self-care. Self-care is putting absurd amounts of Parmesan cheese on your spaghetti. Self-care is more important when going to any restaurant, or more important than going into any restaurant. Okay. It goes on, and it gets even kind of offensive toward people. Like, a lot of people hate this term, and those are the people that contribute to Urban Dictionary. Yeah. Apparently. The reason I thought it was, other than it just being funny, that I thought I should read all those is I do think it kind of shows the spirit of how we think of it now, and also the fact that there's no, like, we don't really need the term. That's why everybody's putting these kind of like different random definitions to it. I mean, sometimes you go there to Urban Dictionary and we make fun of it all the time, but it actually gives you, hey, this was coined by Chief Keef or whatever. This one, shockingly, wasn't coined by Chief Keef. Wow. So then I read that. Well, I read that last, but let's talk about when I first started looking this up. So I Google it. I start seeing like every article. There are tons of articles about self-care, and they all have the word radical or revolutionary in it. And I'm going, what is going on? The radical roots of self-care. So there's an article. Well, before I get to the article, let me share too. I'm going to add this to the stream here. If you watch this on YouTube, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. Look at all the pictures, and I'll kind of describe them here as well. So this first picture, the revolutionary origins of self-care, and it's people holding up a fist in solidarity. There's somebody with a hijab on. Then you have another fist.
Maybe it's a scuba diver, but please continue.
How you can honor the radical history of self-care. Are you intrigued? A history of self-care from its radical roots to its yuppie-driven middle age to its election-inspired resurgence. What by Aisha Harris. And then, power to the people, the radical history of self-care.
That logo looks familiar to me.
It does. And if you'd like to see the logo, you should watch this on video. But it is it's a panther.
It's a panther. Okay.
So let's jump to an article in locallove.com, which now that I just read that out loud, it sounds like a dating website, but it
sounds like it could be a self-care website based on that first definition that you gave us too.
That's right. Oh, wait a minute. This is not, this is a different link. No, it really is an article on locallove.com. It says The Revolutionary Roots of Self-Care by Nicole Stamp. She talks about the fact that there are over 15 million posts on Instagram and Twitter with the hashtag self-care. And why is it so radical and revolutionary? Well, in the 50s, in all of the, by the way, I'm sure you've seen this too, Steve, where you start doing some research and you realize like you're reading the same article 15 times.
Yes.
This is one of those.
Okay.
All the articles are almost exactly the same, to the point where you if you were a professor and you had asked someone to write a paper, or you assigned a paper to your class on something, and you'd be like, okay, these guys all got together and wrote the same paper. So I'm going to go to a news source because we're always looking for news sources. Yes. I'm going to go to teenvogue.com.
Yes.
Which is something I never thought I'd say, and I don't think we've had a Teen Vogue.
Good. It's about time.
Yeah, because when you want to know the facts, you go to Teen Vogue.
Yeah.
So they go through the same background that all these other ones do, which I'm going to give you in a nutshell, which is self-care was a term that started getting used in the 50s, and it was for mainly used for people who had been institutionalized. So it was meant to be, okay, this person needs to learn self-care, meaning they can comb their hair, right? They can groom themselves. They're going to be out, people coming out of being in prison for a very long time. They need to learn.
You need to drink water. You need to go for a walk. Basic stuff. They're being retaught.
That's right. So you've got that, and that was the 50s, and even in the early 60s. But then something happened, and let's jump. Excuse me. Let's jump to Teen Vogue. They say if you go by social media, it's easy to think that self-care is just a series of Instagram posts, candles, bubble baths, yoga pants, et cetera, et cetera. However, the origins of today's self-care industry are deeply embedded in the Black Power movement of the 1960s and 70s in underserved communities across the country. This is from Fader back in 2015. It says, over the last few years in particular, young organizers associated with the Black Lives Matter movement and other causes have taken to social media to discuss the importance of regular self-care in a world that values certain lives over others. On Tumblr, so you know it's good, one post quoting the Black lesbian poet Audre Lorde, caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. Whoa. As she wrote in 1998, and it was reblogged 10,000 times. So essentially, the Black Panthers in the 70s, I guess the late 60s and 70s, became very involved in community efforts across the country, and they sort of changed the narrative about caring for yourself and about this term self-care, and saying that, hey, activists marginalized people. This is starting to ring a bell. It sounds very familiar kind of to what we hear today. I mean, we heard this in COVID, which was that, I'm trying to think of how to put this in a way that's not like me sounding like I'm completely dismissing this, but it's you know, the idea that like healthcare is racist.
Yeah. Well, everything's racist.
Okay. Right. I mean, that was said, right? I mean, it's pretty much, that was the thing of like, it's more important to be out protesting. Well, no, that was a different argument. That was
right.
Oh no, it was that argument because they're saying basically that the healthcare system's racist, and
right.
I lose the thread there, but
yeah.
So without spending too much time on this, basically there are, I mean, anybody that's interested in this, again, this isn't a full topic where we go through and give you every date of every newspaper and when it was cited. The freaking Black Panthers. You didn't think that was going to come up, did you?
I did not. And I don't think Samuel Smiles would have thought that would have come up too.
I don't think so either.
No.
Well, let me take this this visual off. But yeah, I mean, so it went from being, well, it went from Socrates to medical professionals saying, learn how to, you know, people need to learn how to take walks and cut their hair, to, hey, the man isn't going to take care of you. We got to do this ourselves.
Yeah.
And we're going to do like this community outreach and start doing yoga or doing whatever alternative methods of medicine and we're out there. There are a ton of articles about it. So it really hit around that 2015, 2016 time where somebody figured this out, and there are 50 million articles about it. So now self-care just means getting the boots that you want and a latte and pretty much chuggy stuff, if you ask me. So Steve, has it changed your mind? Are you a fan of self-care now as a term?
No, I wasn't. It was going to take a lot to convince me, and this certainly didn't. And I also feel like we need to call out our denounce list. Do we have an update in a while?
Need to. After that, we probably need to. Yes.
Well, maybe, but I think we covered some stuff. So as part of our episode on Uncle Tom and Jim Crow, we thought it was a good time to put out the official Species denounce list. And some elements included we denounce white supremacy. We denounce Black supremacy. We denounce Welsh supremacy. We denounce Eskimo supremacy. And by the way, I can say that because I'm Belgian Mongolian. Basically, if there's a supremacy, we're against it. So sorry, Black Panthers. We don't like racism in any forms.
Down with supremacy, down with this slang, down with self-care.
Yeah.
Let's move on. That was new slang. Now, the big question is, are you going to be able to continue after? I mean, it was such a trip to see where that came from.
It's one of those things that's extremely surprising, and in a weird way, kind of not. Only, you know what I mean? Does that make any sense?
No, I do, because as I was reading through it, you're going, oh, it's sort of like when we had our cancel culture episode, and even conspiracy theory. A lot of the ones that we have where we're thinking, hey, this is new. It's never new. Yeah. And look, I'll be clear. I'm sure there is some truth to that whole idea. I mean, there is certainly truth to self-care, and you should brush your teeth. But it's amazing to see that a lot of the stuff that, frankly, that's happening right now that just seems real bullshitty, has been going on for a while.
Yeah. And, maybe, again, if any group doesn't need that message, I think it's present day America. Maybe we should, export that. Maybe we should go over to Afghanistan and give some people that really do need some. Well, actually, they probably can't walk outside. So maybe it's not good for them.
They're not ready for goat yoga.
Yeah. But something they could be ready for is maybe a self-help book. So to conclude our history of self-help, I want to talk about one of the most famous books in the self-help genre, and one that I've read, and one that's still in print, and actually there's classes on it. It's still relevant today. How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. So this book was published in 1936, over 30 million copies have been sold worldwide, making one of the best-selling books of all time. And it still is a book that's in print today. You can take Dale Carnegie classes. And it's a book I read that I found, again, with all these, I don't think I've found anything that's really changed my life, but I found, there's some interesting things out of that. So these are some things from the book. It's listed on Wikipedia, so I'm not giving any techniques, I think, away that you couldn't get by the book without taking the class. But just one of the things that I like about this book is the title is kind of in the face of your self-help is going to be self-help, how to manipulate other people.
I do appreciate that.
Yeah. And they're honest in that. And there are a couple caveats they give. So for example, one subset of things discussed in this book is 6 ways to make people like you. So I'm just going to run these past you. Become genuinely interested in other people. I like the genuinely with that. That's good.
Yeah.
Smile. Nothing wrong with that.
I mean, you're not breaking a ton of new ground here. But
yeah. And
I wouldn't disagree.
Yeah.
That's good.
Remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language. Maybe. Not going to read all of these, but I will conclude with one.
Mm-hmm.
Make the other person feel important and do it sincerely. So I like all the little caveats that are
right,
given here.
Too.
Become genuinely interested in other people so you can manipulate them.
Yeah, right.
Remember that their name is sweet to them so you can manipulate them.
It reminds me of like the and to be very clear, I've definitely never read any of these or would never try any of this stuff, but I've known other and this is usually like older divorced guys who read the books or tell you, usually they're driving an Uber. Like I'll be in the back of an Uber and, hey, how'd your date go? It's all right. Dude, you should read this book. And I'll be like, man, this girl was out of my league anyway. No one's out of your league, man. No one. And I'm like, settle down, big guy. Yes, that is a phenomenon that happens. Oh no, have you read? And I can't even think of any names, but it's the thing of it's very overt. Do you want women to sleep with you? Wear this long chain and a big black jacket so you look like but really embrace the style. You know what I mean? It's like you're being overt about what you want to do, but then you're also trying to somehow, but genuinely, you need to genuinely embrace this lifestyle. Okay.
Genuinely manipulate people.
Yeah.
So as much as I'm mocking this book, it's actually one that I've read before. I'd actually recommend it as a read. I think it's just it's interesting. I don't think it's going to change your life. I don't think you're reading this away. Of course, I will change that once I sign up as a Dale Carnegie Institute instructor. But that being said, let me tell you about some notable users. Maybe, Scott, this will change your opinion.
And to be clear, I don't think that it's the same thing. I shouldn't say that. Smiling is much different than telling someone to wear a big cross chain or something. But please go ahead. I'd love to hear.
Sure. So, and this is all according to Wikipedia. So I'm sure this is 100% accurate too.
Yeah.
Warren Buffett. According to Wikipedia, Warren Buffett, the famous multi-billionaire, took the Dale Carnegie course when he was 20 years old, and this day has the diploma in his office.
I believe it.
The book has been said to have greatly influenced the life of television and film legend Donna Reed, who was given this when she was in high school by a high school teacher. I want to clarify, she was in high school when a high school teacher gave it to her. That sounds kind of strange, maybe outside that context.
Yeah.
And finally, Charles Manson. He used what he learned in the book to manipulate women into killing people on his behalf. And again, that's according to Wikipedia. I haven't vetted that, but I frankly didn't feel like vetting that one.
Good call.
Yeah. So in summary of self-help, the term that defines the current self-help industry comes back to a self-help book entitled Self-Help with Illustrations of Character and Conduct from 1859 by Samuel Smiles. It was the seed from which a mighty billion-dollar industry grew. I personally think while they can be helpful sometimes, I also think that they prey on weakness and fear. And another trend I don't like with it is they seem to combine self-help with pop psychology, in kind of a pseudoscience pop psychology too. And this is a subject that we will address right now with our special guest, Jesse Singal, the Blocked and Reported podcast and author of The Quick Fix: Why Fad Psychology Can't Cure Our Social Ills. Our guest is a journalist whose work has appeared in many publications, including New York Times, Boston Globe, and the Atlantic Magazine. He's formerly editor of Science of Us at New York Magazine. He also does the journalism thing on his own Substack, on Substack on his own newsletter, Single Minded. By the way, I love that. I like a good pun. I like that.
Thank you.
Good job.
Did not take much effort to come up with, but I appreciate it.
Sometimes that's all you need to make the best. He co-hosts the weekly Blocked and Reported podcast with Katie Herzog. In all his ventures, he's never afraid to confront the most controversial subjects of the day, as evidenced by his daily, constant smacking down of fools on Twitter. Finally, he is the author of The Quick Fix, Why Fad Psychology Can't Cure Our Social Ills, which is available wherever books are sold, including Audible, where you can hear him read his own book to you. Please, thank you for joining us, Jesse Singal.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. All right, so before our discussion here, I wanted to get pumped up, make sure I had confidence. So I spent some time based on a TED Talk that inspired me a few years ago. I stood like a gorilla and did a power pose before we had a chance to speak. Can you tell me a little bit about the research and studies that scientifically validate the effects of power posing?
Yes, you will now be permanently more confident and competent. So that was a good idea.
That's what I wanted to hear.
One of the chapters in my book is about power posing. This came out of a study co-authored by Amy Cuddy, who was then at Harvard Business School. At this point, my book is just a jumble of studies and dates in my head, but I believe it was 2010. 3 months ago, I had a good grasp on all this stuff. I want to say 2010. The study came out. Basically, they took a bunch of Columbia University undergrads. They had some of them do these so-called power posing poses, where they sort of stood with their arms out in assertive poses that project power or look powerful. Others of them, they had them do contractive poses, so sort of a mummy thing where you cross your legs and arms. And they claim to have found that kids in the high power poses had more testosterone in their saliva, and that they took more risks in a subsequent betting game where you could, I think, win $2 and then double or nothing bet it. So from this one study, Amy Cuddy gave a super viral TED Talk and basically saying that just a minute or two of power posing can rewire your brain. That was the sort of language she used, and this really sort of melded with lean-in feminism, which is a brand of feminism centered on women basically acting in a more masculine way in the workplace. That to get ahead, to overcome discrimination, they need to power pose, to ask for what's rightfully theirs, and to be more assertive in general. So that was the origin of power posing. And I think at one point, Cuddy's TED Talk was one of the most watched on the site, tens of millions of views.
So the research and studies behind that validated that this was something that worked and would definitely lock in for forever new confidence and ability to overcome men.
Yeah, well, I was joking a little bit about the forever thing. They never claimed forever. They claimed that if you power pose right before a meeting, maybe you'll be better at negotiating, or before a presentation, you'll be more confident. And there were some studies that seemed to replicate this in different settings. It really caught on and was seen as a true idea. The problem is in 2016, one of the other co-authors on the study, a woman named Dana Carney out of Berkeley, she posted to her faculty website, "I don't think this is real. I think we cut statistical corners. I just don't think it's an accurate result." And there were some sort of high-profile failed attempts to replicate it. And what we're left with is not very much evidence that power posing does anything. I don't think standing with your arms out for a minute before a presentation is going to hurt you. I don't want to overstate it, but it was one of these examples of a time when the hype seriously outran the available evidence.
So this would be something I think was a little bit more low level. A lot of the things in your book you discuss are more pop psychology that becomes, I think, a little bit more dangerous when it gets ingrained into human resources, trying to figure out if people were prejudiced or things like that. But from maybe a self-help sort of perspective, is it a bad thing if people receive a placebo effect or inspiration from something like power posing, even if the research behind it's not the best?
No, I'm not really. I mean, my problem was always more the way she in my view, exaggerated the evidence in her TED Talk and in some quotes, to say that this rewires your brain or makes you more confident. It was all based on really thin evidence. So I had a friend's wife, when I was working on the book, we were out to dinner, she said, "Oh no, I power pose. I like it." I was like, "Go ahead, keep power pose. If you think it helps you, that's fine." And it could have some, even just sort of, if you stand with your arms out like that, you might take deep breaths for a minute. And, it wouldn't shock me if taking deep breaths for a minute before presentation makes some people a little bit better at it. So it's really the overhyping and her making a lot of speaking fee money and making money on a book, all of which I thought over exaggerated the evidence.
Right. Relatedly, you use the term Tedification in your book when you talk about pop psychology and fad psychology. What does this term mean, and what is its effect?
Yeah, I think I took that from Carol Tavris, a social psychologist, but people have thrown around terms like it. I just don't want to imply I came up with it. Basically, the tedification of science is sanding off its rough edges and the complexities of scientific research and presenting a sort of gleaming, highly marketed product that can be communicated in like an 8 to 12 minute TED Talk. So this was an example of that, where the evidence was never that strong. There was always there was reason to be skeptical that power posing could have the profound effects Cuddy suggested it did. But it's an irresistible product from a TED Talk sort of self-help standpoint. So I think some scientists are worried that there's this feedback effect where research psychology had fallen into a rut of bad methods that could produce false positives. And then the TED Talk stage is beckoning and maybe incentivizing you to cut corners a little bit, and that both those effects sort of cycled into one another.
I found it's also very helpful to help people leave you alone before a presentation if you're in a conference room in a gorilla pose.
Yep.
I haven't been able to try it out in a few years, obviously, with all the vid stuff, but looking forward to get back in the office so I can.
Well, especially if you make grunting noises like a gorilla and you pound your chest and stuff.
I didn't even think of that, so you're value adding already. Thank you, Jesse.
Of course.
So the theme of this episode is the origin and history of self-help, which often overlaps with pop and fad psychology. Have you ever used a self-help book, and if so, how did it affect you?
I don't think I have. I think I've always been really skeptical of them. I mean, the closest I've come is dabbling with some sort of cognitive behavioral principles, and to me, that's where self-help and legitimate science sort of intersect. Like there's some controversy over the strength of the evidence for cognitive behavioral therapy, but it's worked for me to realize I have certain sort of slightly anxious or depressive tendencies, and if something goes wrong, my thoughts might start to spiral, and to recognize that in yourself and to learn not to do it. I think that's useful, and to me that's sort of connected with like a lot of meditation practices, which I also haven't gotten into, but just recognizing that the thoughts in your head, they're not the world. They're just thoughts, and you're not you're not locked to them. They don't need to sort of pull you down under the waves with them. I find all that very useful. I'm not sure the science is always as great as people make it out to be, but I have no problem with all that. I think everyone could benefit from it a little bit.
Right, and you're also not charging people hundreds of thousands of dollars to say that this works and that you're the new guru of this idea. Or maybe you are. Maybe that's the step for your next book. I should.
You're not doing that, nor are you claiming it will solve all their problems. I mean, I haven't read a lot of books on meditation, but a guy named Dan Harris, he was a Nightline anchor who had a panic attack on air. He wrote a book called 10% Happier. And I think that's a really good framing. It's a good, honest framing. He's saying, this thing made me 10% happier. And that's the most we can hope for. So maybe some people at lower baselines more than 10%, but that's a good thing to shoot for.
I'm going to tell my wife about that. I don't want her to expect to be so much happier with me, but maybe 10%. I think that's something. Shoot for double digits.
You should tell her that you think you could be a 5% better husband. I think that's a good thing to shoot for.
That's catchy too. I like how you've already dialed down 10%. You've spoken to me for 8 minutes, and you're like, "There's no way 10% is going to come out of this guy." Well, so thank you.
Of course.
During your research for your book, did you come across any fad psychology that you really liked? Anything that was maybe helpful or inspiring, if not valid?
No, I mean, I think what I just said, the stuff with the CBT is like the closest I got. It's not entirely a negative book because I read a little bit about how psychology is getting better and how it's creating better tools. And I do give a few examples of like ideas from this world that have a little something behind them. But overall, the storyline is that we've spent perhaps hundreds of millions of dollars, if not more, on ideas that never had much evidence behind them. And I think there's no way to tell that story honestly that isn't fairly negative.
Yeah. And you do, to give a shout out to your book there, it does end in a positive manner. So I know when you're kind of going through something and a lot of the premises, let's analyze this and figure out what's not working, it does sound a little bit inherently negative, but I will vouch for your book, which I did do the Audible version. So it's nice. I get to listen to you on your podcast, you get to have your own book read to me. It was kind of staying in. When you become your guru, you've built the basis there of having many resources of people who are used to listening to you to get advice.
Exactly. That's the next step.
It is. And I'm going to be there for you, by the way. That's how I'm going to conclude, is to figure out how I can get behind you. So I could say I was one of the early adopters of whatever it is that you proceed with. So one of the things I was just hitting on there that I enjoyed about your book is you do a good job of digging the research to, examine the validity of some of the science and studies that prove the fads that are there. So for a layman, just for someone who maybe doesn't have as much time or the expertise that you do to go into, determine the validity of something, is there anything you recommend for just listeners to how to check the validity of a new finding or trend?
Yeah, there's a few things. I mean, the most basic one is sample size. If you run a study on 15 people, you probably can't extrapolate to the real world that much, especially if they're just like university students, because the world isn't university students. Mm-hmm. The other thing is this idea of you run a study in a lab where you test something like some very specific, narrow, controlled thing, and then you say, well, we found this, therefore in the real world. So it's sort of a leap, right? It's like if you gave someone a sugar pill in a lab and you took their blood, I'm making all this up as I go, and in the lab an hour and a half later they haven't eaten anything else, their blood pressure goes down a little bit. That doesn't necessarily mean that in the real world setting, where you're not sitting in a lab controlled, not eating other stuff, not doing other stuff, that the pill would have the same effect. All that applies to psychological effects. So I think people should understand that, like, just because we find something in a lab doesn't mean it works in the real world. And they should also understand that you don't need to be an expert on the statistical side of it, which I certainly am not. But we know at this point that because of how statistics are done, you can find stuff that isn't there. You can find the probability of false positives is unfortunately high.
Reminds me of one of my favorite Simpsons quotes from Homer. Statistics can be used to prove anything. 42% of people know that.
Exactly.
You can use that one also.
Thank you.
So this is a question I ask everyone that we speak to, and you're a little bit unique, as you'll see once the question hits. Or I think your perspective will be very interesting. So we stick with the belief that as a country we're not as far apart politically or socially as the media and social media make us to believe. What are your thoughts on that idea?
I think we are, I think partisans are very far apart and they make a lot of noise. Then I think there is this sort of, like, the term I've heard from political scientists is exhausted majority of people who have tuned out of all the noise and maybe don't have such strong beliefs. I think the Democratic Party I view as, like, basically a center-left party, and on economic. I mean, we don't need to get too much into this. I just think there are huge differences in the basic Democratic and Republican worldviews of how society should function. I think they're sometimes overstated, and I think sometimes people on my side, we sometimes are like, well, Republicans are just evil, they're just racist, there's nothing more to it than that, which I don't like. But yeah, I think it's more complicated than, like, we aren't far apart. I think the people who scream on social media or who write for newspapers are very far apart. But I think most people on most issues are fairly moderate, like, if you actually dig into their beliefs on a controversial subject.
So I think another thing, and tell me if you disagree with me on this, but, the state of discourse and political culture right now seems to me, at least, to be in a little bit of a worse spot than it is normally. Not that there's ever been a great time of unity, but right now, and I think, social media exasperating that. So, you've got some magic power from the next Marvel movie to change the situation. So obviously the first thing you're going to do is take vengeance on all your Twitter enemies. And I would grant that for you first. Naturally. But then what would you do to maybe fix the state of discourse in our culture right now?
I mean, if we could basically ban everyone with a platform as a writer from going on Twitter for a month, I think that would immediately improve things. This is one of these areas where I've been a little bit radicalized, because I think if you asked me in 2015, I would have said, oh, it's just Twitter. But it's this thing where your job is to express opinions to the public, and right. You spend probably sometimes 12 to 16 hours a day checking a little box that shows you what all your friends are thinking and what they think about you. Right. You could not come up with a worse way to distort everything. And I think it's had a really pernicious effect. So that would, in terms of like practical steps like a newsroom could take, take a week off from Twitter except to promote your articles. I think that'd be a good start.
I think that would be phenomenal. I think one of the problems I see is like, or you tell me as a journalist, like, you maybe want to do that, but you also can't be the only journalist not on Twitter, because everyone else, it kind of feeds upon itself. You don't want to miss out, I guess, on what's happening also. But I mean, I think that would be great if there was a way just for everyone to take a month off, of course, with the irony of all of us, promoting ourselves on Twitter and staying on there. But it would be just a great way, if New York Times said no one's allowed, if you work for us, you're not allowed on Twitter for the next month, I'm sure there'd be some odd Slack discussions internally after that. But just theoretically, I think that would be a wonderful thing. And by the way, we are working actively to find a term to define what, for people who attack other people on Twitter and then never have any results or repercussions, which I've for people who aren't aware, that Jesse often is on the receiving end, undeservedly, of accusations and things just being thrown at you that you do a great job of swatting down and pulling the truth out. But there's never any repercussions for people who could say terrible things about you or accuse you of things, but there doesn't ever seem to be a way to have justice brought. You can, if you're on the right side of the Twitter fundamentalism, you can say whatever you want and there's no consequences for that. And that is something I'm trying to find a term that would not be libelous or would end up with me having to visit with an attorney. But we're keeping that in mind for you as we proceed on this. You're welcome.
I appreciate that.
All right. So promote what you want.
Yeah. Well, the book is the first thing. I would love for some people bought The Quick Fix, Why Fad Psychology Can't Cure Social Ills. My newsletter, Single Minded, my podcast, Blocked and Reported. For all of these, there's like the podcast in particular, there's free stuff every week, but there's also bonus episodes you can pay for. So yeah, just a lot of us journalists are sort of our independent islands now, and we got to build up our our island amenities. I want a greenhouse, like a pool, a fortress to repel people from other islands trying to invade my island. So you can help if you subscribe to my stuff.
I like that. And enjoyed the book. Love the Substack.
Thank you.
Blocked and Reported, when I can listen to it, sometimes it stresses me out, to be honest with you, just the subjects you guys have to cover. When it comes out on a Monday, I'm like, all right, I gotta get through a couple cups of coffee for that.
That's fair.
But please tell Katie that I try very much to be inspired by her hair and see what I can do to pull it off. I didn't get it today. I didn't feel like I thought about getting like a yellow cap or something, but
that's a little Herzogian.
It is. She's my that's who I look to for hair. So just pass that on to her when you get a chance. So Jesse, thank you very much for joining us. If you've got a few minutes, we'll hang around for a very new Patreon segment called 3 Silly Questions. Yep. But anyone listening, please pick up Jesse's book, The Quick Fix, wherever you buy books. Look them up on Substack and listen to Blocked and Reported after you've had at least one cup of coffee. And for more, go to patreon.com/Speaksies to hear 3 Silly Questions with Jesse.
That was Steve's interview with Jesse Singal. Thank you very much for listening to Origin of Speaksies. If you enjoy the show, please consider becoming a Speaksies supporter by going to patreon.com/Speaksies. It really helps if you tell a friend about the show as well. If there's a word or phrase you'd like us to cover, you can email us by going to Scott at Speacies or Steve at Speacies. You can check out our YouTube channel. If you haven't already, please subscribe there. Just go to speacies.com/listen. You can also call and leave us a voicemail at 804-621-5803. And don't be shy. We love the voicemails, especially the ones that, especially when they compliment us or insult us on our pronunciations. So thanks again for listening. And remember, Bob's your uncle.
Watch out for bears, and kale is from the devil.
Speacies.